Disabled. It is a word we often use as a label for others without realizing we may be disabled someday. From having fun or doing something stupid, from a disease, or from aging. We are surrounded by people who were born able-bodied and then became disabled at some point. More than 6.2 million adult Canadians, or 22% of the population in this country, are living with some form of disability that affects their level of freedom, independence, or quality of life. That does not include people 15 years and under, so the number is higher. Jen McEachen is a person with deafblindness who has managed volunteer resources and worked in emergency management. She has spent recent years exploring the trends and gaps related to the needs of the disability community. Jen brings lived experience working with emergency management professionals and the disability community. She's a member of the Canadian Risks and Hazards Network, which is where I met her, and you will see on their social media, they lead with accessible communications first. Welcome to the Wildfires, Floods, and Chaos Communications Podcast. I'm your host, Tim Conrad, and here is Jen McEachen describing the disabilities she navigates.
And I was born with this disability, so I have the lived experience of accessibility challenges and then moving into the emergency management field to help individuals navigate all four facets of the emergency management cycle.
And can you tell us a little bit about kind of what your day is like and sort of some things that you do have to navigate and what it's like for you?
Well, I am a guide dog user, and I've been using a guide dog for 26 years. So my day does have kind of a routine. I do a lot of walking. I am a student with the Justice Institute of British Columbia in the Bachelor's of Emergency and Security Management program. And one of the challenges is getting articles and textbooks in accessible format that I can read with my screen reader and also in Braille. And I also use a lot of different technology, such as Zoom, to connect virtually with individuals in my consulting business and reading accessible websites and documents, especially within the emergency management side of things. So, and all kinds of different things. So it varies from day to day. I never know what kind of work I'll be doing, especially with emergency management, plus all the various committees that I sit on that is related within the field I work in, such as the Canadian Risk and Hazard Network as a board of directors. And my role is to assist with making sure all our social media, website, documents are available in accessible format. So does that give you an idea?
Yeah, that does. And as you were giving that answer, you might have heard my dog bark in the background. So I think my dog was saying hi to your dog. So Buddy says hello to Parmesan, who is always by your side. So, and I'll make sure we'll sneak a picture in for people to be able to see Parmesan in the show notes. So, yeah, real sweet dog. So what advice could you offer information officers and crisis communicators that would help them to be more accessible?
Well, one of the key issues, especially with the current public notification systems, it's not inclusive of all audiences. And the problems that I have encountered is the language barriers, especially with the deaf and deafblind community, and how they are able to read the information. And I have encountered a scenario where I had to explain the difference between, for the deaf community, the difference between their alert systems in their apartment or house, their fire alarm and their doorbell, whereas the public notifications on your phone, it's two separate things. They didn't understand that. The other problem that I have seen is, especially with new people that move into the area, for example, they are not well equipped to understand their area, knowing the street names. So in that instance, we need both a visual information and text information, so it includes everybody in plain language that they can understand. So there is a lot of contributing factors, and recently the Public Safety Canada and the Canadian Radio and Telecommunications CRTC did a consultation back in the fall of 2025 requesting feedback on the current system and what changes needs to be made.
We acknowledge and respect the Indigenous people on whose ancestral territories we work and play, whether the land is unceded or ceded. Your relationship with this land and your culture is one we admire wherever we are. We are committed to truth and reconciliation through regular, meaningful actions. It's very interesting, because emergency alert systems should be alerting everybody, right? It doesn't matter who it is, and I have a rule that nobody's left behind, right? That my team has heard that from me when we've been out there. Nobody is left behind. We always have to think about all of the people that we might be missing in our communication. So you talk about the emergency alert system and the public notification system. So for some people, they might know different names, the Alert Ready system across Canada or the BC Emergency Alert System. And then at a local level, depending on where you are, you might see a number of different systems in place there. Some have names like Voyant or Everbridge, Alertable. There's a bunch of different systems out there. So how can the people that operate those systems improve on public notification? What are some real hard ways that they can look at to improve?
Recruit people with disabilities to test it, because if you don't include them and allow them to provide feedback, how are you going to know what to do in the future? Like, we do the testing twice a year, but there's not enough feedback that's going into those different manufacturers to say, here's some areas that you need to prove with your network or the notifications. This is how I would word it, or how can we implement ASL into these notifications, and where can we get it in different languages, all inclusive information where we can improve on those areas. But right now, they're not getting that feedback, and they're making the same mistakes over and over and over again.
Yeah, that's right. And we want to, I think I'll impress this later on in the podcast with some other information, I hope, that will help people to understand. But when you do things for people with disabilities, you're doing the same thing for everybody. So everybody benefits. And I have actual true measurement that shows that. So it's important to look at these things, and there are small steps that we can continue to add. And yes, they seem a little bit bigger off the start, but once you get used to it, it just becomes part of the process. And so I think there are some really good ways of improving those notification systems. And it's important to make sure we're checking all the boxes within our process when we're going through that as information officers.
I agree. Invite them to, so even going out to different nonprofit organizations that serve people with disability. They're the ones that will know who the best people to connect with, that knows the system well and can provide that feedback.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, absolutely. And so what preparedness and resource documents should local governments and First Nations consider developing to help connect better with people with disabilities?
Well, I'm actually going to do a little plug here. I'm on the People with Disabilities Advisory Committee with Emergency Management, Climate Readiness, EMCR, and Prepare BC right now. And we're currently revamping, completely starting from scratch, the preparedness guide for people with disability, because the old documents that was used, you couldn't even read them in the PDF files, and the information did not include the current systems now. For example, the use of cell phones and smartphones and all the other technologies. And so, like myself, as the person with the guide dog, I was able to provide feedback on how they implement information on guide dogs. And we're hoping to have new copies available by the end of 2026. So stay tuned for that. So, yeah. And
Really?
and it needs to include everybody. The intersectionality of people with disabilities and all the other groups, such as the LGBTQ community, Indigenous, everybody to come together to share feedback on how to improve. Because, for example, the Indigenous community have to consider their needs and their cultures, because they have their own sign language.
Yeah.
Compared to ASL. So, yeah, there's a whole different aspect that needs to be implemented in these resources. Each province does things differently, but I would love to see consistency in all of them, but I don't think that will ever happen. But pardon me, it's a pipe dream. So
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. And it's steps. And I'm happy to say, like in the last year or so, I've been able to integrate ASL into a crisis communications plan that I developed, which was really exciting. And I am able to now take that to another level as well. So there are things you can do if you start to really try to just wander down that path. So I'm curious how you would distribute the documents and things like that. How do you get them around to people?
Well, put it in all different formats. Like, for example, ASL. Because the deaf community literacy level is pretty low. So making sure that you have ASL implemented in these documents, the way you do it is you would have different interpreters on the screen on the website where the documents live. Have braille copies available that can be sent in the mail or through a braille format on the computer that you can download and read off a braille display. Large print, PDF, audio, the DAISY formats. So there's all kinds of formats that needs to be implemented in those documents so it reaches out to everyone.
Yeah, that's great. And I just good opportunity for me to bring up a thing from my past. In 2017, the wildfires in the Caribou, I talk about them a lot on the podcast because it was such a massive event and really challenged a lot of the systems that existed at the time. And one of the things that we did was we recorded our video updates that we did almost on a daily basis. And we would take the audio and cut that off and then put it onto the phone line so that people could phone in and listen to the update on the phone line. And I was shocked at how many people really picked up on that. We had measurement on how many people were clicking through to that option. And it was shocking to me how many people were doing it because we had two things. We had people that couldn't quite get the information through a video. Maybe it was at the time, internet was not as widely available in that region. So watching a video was more difficult. But also those with disabilities, it was an opportunity for them to be able to hear very clearly through their system what was going on. Can you talk maybe a little bit where we were heading down the right path with that? Because it certainly seemed like we were.
It is, but the other issue with audio, which is great for blind individuals, blind and very visually impaired individuals, because the audio information is better. But again, with the deaf population, and the deaf blind, which gets even more complicated with their needs, because they have very limited access to the computer and their knowledge of using the computer is quite limited. So unfortunately, we still have a long ways to go to reach everybody. Audio's great, but also having a transcript is essential as well, so that it reaches to the deaf-blind population so they can read the text only as well. So
Yeah, and that's one of the most honestly key roles of when you put out a podcast. One of the most important things to put out is the transcript to go with it. That helps not only with obviously searchability of your podcast, but for those people that need to look at a transcript in order to be able to understand what is going on. So where can people find some resources to help them along? What are some other spots that they could go to beyond those that you've mentioned already?
Well, I was going to share it later on, but one of the key things that I want to reiterate is the Accessible Canada Act, which was, it received royal assent in 2019, if I recall, and that's a federal act. And each province has their own accessibility act as well. And under the Accessible Canada Act, we have the Accessibility Standards of Canada. And they implement different standards for different areas that is required. And one of the key things that I'm going to be reiterating repeatedly is the Federal Standards of Emergency Measures is currently has not recruited individuals to join that committee. But once a committee is created, there's going to be a draft standard for individuals to review. The reason why I want to share this is a lot of emergency management professionals don't know this exists because they focus on their municipality and their local authority and provincial laws. Unfortunately, like for example with BC, with the current changes with the emergency management EDMA, forget the whole thing. Yeah. But right now it focuses heavily on the Indigenous population, which is great. But I think we need to find a way to combine it together. And unfortunately, with standards, it's not law compared to actual acts. And so we need to find a way to implement it together. But luckily, for British Columbia, where I reside, we have a memorandum of understanding, MOU, with Accessibility Standards of Canada. So the Accessible BC Act that we have will align with the federal standards. But right now, we're not there yet. And we're supposed to be ready by 2040. So wanted to reiterate that importance aspect. I kind of derailed a little bit there. Yeah.
That's all right. Guide dogs are remarkable, and watching Parmesan work at the recent CRHNet symposium in Edmonton proved how important they are. Did you know you should never get excited or approach a guide dog? Some wear vests, but all wear harnesses. A harness means hands off. A guide dog in a harness means, please don't interact with me, I'm working. As tempting as it may be, never pet, talk to, or make eye contact with a guide dog in a harness. Contain your excitement. Don't encourage excitable play with a guide dog. Staying calm is part of the job, and excitement directed towards them is distracting. Say hello another time. If you approach a guide dog with your pet dog, keep your dog on a leash and away from the guide dog. Also, guide dogs are welcome everywhere. They are not pets. They are companions that are needed by their handlers, so they are allowed to enter any space that is open to anybody else. And I wanted to bring up just something that people can look to. And this is actually in relation to a podcast that I'm just wrapping up the final stages of producing. And that's the Lake Echo and Porter's Lake fire from 2008 in Nova Scotia. And out of that came, many years later, they developed what's called a vulnerable persons registry. And this is with the Halifax Regional Municipality there. So it's a voluntary registry where people can register and be identified so that they can get help when something happens. And that came out of the 2008 fires because there was a recognition that, wow, we don't have something like this. And the what if scenarios came very real in that particular fire. So, and I also wanted to bring up one more on the stats side of things that I have from the past. When we added captions to our videos in 2017, we saw a meteoric rise in our watches and views that we had not seen except when we first started putting videos on. But it was a 38% rise in the amount of time people were watching, and I believe it was a 32% time in the amount of watches we were seeing. So it immediately, just by that little thing of having captions on a video, which helps people with accessibility needs, it helped everybody. Right. So it was just like truly remarkable. And we're not talking small numbers here. We had over 1 million views on our videos that year. So we had very good metrics to be able to pinpoint things like that. So always think about it because it's going to benefit, as I said, other people. And I have lots of good metrics like that can show it.
I think that's fantastic because that shows the inclusivity, and you saw the changes and you kept up with those changes and implemented it. And I think if you continue that, the more people will come forward to your show, and hopefully other podcasters will follow suit and see that what you implemented will help them make those changes. There's a podcast that I listened to a long time ago that implemented a separate podcast that she recorded that had ASL interpreters interpreting everything.
Wow.
Yeah.
Incredible.
So, yeah, and, having all of those mediums covered is essential. And like I will say again, it's a pipe dream that everything gets inclusive for all people. Nothing, I can't remember the saying, but there's the Accessible Canada Act. Nothing with us is without us or something like that. But it shows the statement that you provided earlier, how we don't want to leave anybody behind. And unfortunately, in all phases of the emergency management cycle, that's the gap. We're still leaving a lot of people behind.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah. And so we're going to shift a little bit here. We're going to talk about nonprofits a little bit and How can nonprofits work with persons with disabilities? And I just want to note that you'll see the acronym PWD in relation to that. How can they work with emergency management professionals to collaborate ahead of disasters?
For those who are not familiar, PWD stands for Persons with Disability. So when I reiterate that, that's what that means. And for nonprofits, what I like to see, and this is kind of a work that I'm trying to work on as well, is to integrate ways for nonprofit organizations to reach out their local authority and work with local emergency management professionals to be included in their planning meetings, because they are the nonprofit organization. I'm going to use CNIB as an example. CNIB, well, no, they will have professionals, including people with lived experience, can provide suggestions on what they can add to their plans or business continuity plans, what they can do with a person with disability. A lot of workplaces have a PEEP, PEEP,
Mm-hmm.
the personal emergency evacuation plan for people with disability. However, there's a lot of gaps in that, and that needs to be implemented not just for the person, but the overall organization. So this is where people with lived experience can collaborate with the emergency management professionals, especially with the preparedness and mitigation stage. Starting there first is highly beneficial. And before we hit the response and recovery phases, they need to be the contact for those individuals that may need to be evacuated, such as CNIB Deafblind Community Services. In Ontario, they have their emergency intervener services. They need to have a phone tree or texting tree to contact them and say, hey, we need these services. This community, the deafblind community, is going to need help.
Mm-hmm.
So we're trying to get that started in BC, but there's a lot of roadblocks that we're experiencing right now. But even with MS, multiple sclerosis, or people with paraplegia, they have a lot of complicating factors because wheelchairs. Many of the motorized wheelchairs have a lot of issues like the batteries and where they can park. And most places, municipalities, will have a predetermined reception center that already established.
Mm-hmm.
Prince George have trailers that they use for reception centers, plus their emergency ops center, the EOC. But if it gets too large, then we use the local college or our hockey arena. So looking at the accessibility lens, place where there's lots of places that a person can access. Okay. So we have to think about the whole cycle, not just the preparedness and mitigation with the community coming together. This is a huge community effort, and they're not being included in that. So
Yeah, as part of a project I was part of a few years ago called the Pathways to Preparedness Project, which was a Canadian Red Cross funded project that actually came out of those 2017 fires I was talking about earlier. We were looking at some of the gaps that might be there for the folks with accessibility. And I was, quite astonished by some of the stories I heard from folks, including quadriplegics, people with complete blindness, Parkinson's, lots of different backgrounds that added to it. So can you tell me what some of the gaps that you've observed during evacuations for individuals with disabilities?
I haven't had too many interactions on this aspect, but what I can tell you is most people are not prepared at all. Just to reiterate, the United Nations of Disaster Risk Reduction, they did a statistical analysis worldwide, and one of the key points is 20% of the PWDs that said they could not evacuate independently. And also 85% of PWDs were not included in participation of the planning. So if they're not included in the planning, they're not going to be able to evacuate successfully. So there's going to be a lot more panic and stress for them if they are not prepare. A couple of years ago, I sat in a focus group. So picture me as the only emergency management professional in the room, and everybody else was totally blind and live in the lower mainland of which is Vancouver, Metro Vancouver area
Mhm.
for those not familiar with British Columbia. And that area is very much earthquake prone. That's the biggest
Mm,
risk.
Very
Okay.
much.
And on that call, many of those folks said they didn't know what to do if the earthquake happened. They did not know about drop, cover, and hold on. None.
Hmm.
And that's scary to think about.
Yeah, it is. It is indeed, right? And I can kind of associate why, because a lot of that campaign around that has been very graphic or video based and maybe hasn't been built properly with keeping people with accessibility needs in mind. So back to that evacuation, are we serving individuals with disabilities with respect when they arrive after evacuating?
One of the issues that I have seen with the training with ESS or emergency support services volunteers is they're getting the minimal basic knowledge of what to do when a person with a disability comes to the reception or registration desk.
Mhm.
Do they know where to access information to help them? For example, a person who's deafblind, how are they going to communicate with the deafblind individual? What are what is that person's needs going to be? Because they're all different. So
Mhm.
with deafblind individuals, they could be, as far as communication, it could be two-hand manual, ASL, print on palm, or writing on an iPad. They're all different. So how
Mhm.
are they going to understand? And the other problem is they're learning just from videos and not any real life simulations or learning from a lived person who knows how to teach these things. For example, I've done training sessions mostly on guide dog related presentations is
Mhm.
teaching people how to do proper sighted guide.
Mhm.
They don't know how to do that right. A lot of the times, the person will grab the person's hand. That's wrong. The blind person needs to reach the elbow. So most people don't do that. Know that. Sometimes the videos explain that, but you need to practice it.
Yes, yes,
There's been
absolutely.
bare minimum training for ESS, not just ESS, but all emergency management professionals. So
Mental well being is something we all have a responsibility to ourselves to be aware of and to look for ways to improve through intentional actions, such as getting outside or seeking professional help. As a responder, consider taking mental health first aid, which has been very important for the work I do, interacting with people during large emergencies, from residents to responders. If you are in urgent need of help in Canada, dial or text 988. You deserve to be heard. They are there to listen. It is a safe spot to talk 24 hours a day, every day of the year. So
yeah.
true, right? I have to say, I just quick moment to say that I was so lucky. The college that I went to school for public relations just down the hall from us was the ASL class. So it was awesome. They're a good group, partied with them.
Wow.
And yeah, it was we had lots of fun together. But yeah, so it did teach me, because it was the school that at the time where it was located, the building was very old, dated back to World War I, World War II era, and so getting around was not easy. So we all became part of the help to get around. So I'm going to go back though now to this ESS piece that you just brought up,
Mhm.
and when you're doing volunteer orientation or ongoing training, like you talk about, getting the people in there and getting that lived experience. And certainly I hear there's an opportunity to always bring somebody with the disability into an exercise or into a preparedness moment. Like it's not that difficult to do. With this project I just mentioned, it's a number of phone calls. We actually did do a focus group, but the phone calls were actually super helpful to help us build out a little bit of a strategy. So how can ESS and other health services training be implemented for those who require extra supports?
Like I suggested earlier, is that whole collaboration with nonprofit organizations, because they are the ones that will be the experts on how to train on, for example, the blind, visually impaired, and deafblind population, on the sighted guide and the communication needs. And actually, I think it was 2 years ago, can't remember now, but Canadian Risk and Hazard Network actually they did a collaboration with Humber College. They offered ASL courses in learning different signs in the emergency situations and reception centers, etc. So those are great ways to collaborate, so that even if the basic things, it'll help that person feel that connection when they first walk in the door. And the other thing is, once you get those nonprofits, get them to sit on those exercises as well. And that's what as part of my consulting, that's what I offer, is the observation of the exercise and to provide suggestions on improvement. And the other one that I think is great, and I don't know if they do this anywhere else in Canada, but Vancouver Airport, they always do a call for actors. So that's a great time, if you're a person with a disability, to put your foot in the door and say, hey, I would like to be an actor for your exercise.
Yeah. It absolutely is. And I honestly, as someone that's put on different types of exercises or participated in them, that it would be so welcomed. It really would. We are always desperately trying to find those different population needs that are out there. And on that note, that intersection of disability with other population needs, what do we need to be considering for, like the 2SL, LGBTQ, and Indigenous communities, how that all intersects? Like, what are some things that we need to think about there?
I myself is still learning about the whole LGBTQ and the Indigenous needs, but I can tell you that hearing their experiences is so essential, approaching them and asking them, what would work if you need to evacuate? How can we help you? Is there anything we need to implement to be sure that your stress is lowered when you are recovering from a disaster? So those are the things that we're all going to be learning, because things evolve, right? So the Indigenous population has quite a high rate of people with disabilities, and and their needs are going to be different from the other populations. So it's really important to immerse yourself into their culture and understand how they can be helped. So bring in that cultural safety and implement with people with disabilities in that.
It is a key thing to consider. And, and on that note, with the Indigenous communities having a higher rate, that's a lot of that can be traced back to the colonial things that have happened to them, and all of those terrible things has resulted in this is one of the outputs, unfortunately, of that. So let's switch over to local governments now. And how can they break down barriers, break down stigma, and help underserved populations?
Well, this is one of the circumstances where it's a similar statement that I made, where we all have to collaborate together. And the problem is, let me step back and rephrase. There are some communities that are communicating with people with disabilities and staying in touch with them to help collaborate. For example, here in Prince George, where I live, I am in contact with the team here in Prince George. I've been a couple of times. I've done some collaborations with them, toured their trailers to give them guidance on anything that needs to be implemented, changed, whatnot. So the emergency management departments should take the initiative to reach out, right? And one of the cities that had done a fantastic job is Ottawa. They reached out to the disability community and created a webinar of preparedness that was inclusive of all people with disabilities. They had live transcript, captioning, ASL interpreter, everything that was available to them. And for those who would like to see a sample of it, they have a YouTube channel where that is available as well. So that's one step, you can use that city as an example that has broadened their ability to reach out to the community and help them be prepared for disaster. And many ask great questions on other things that's not been considered. So there are other considerations, but I think more and more communities need to do this. There's not enough happening in that area. It's slow, but it's slowly happening. And with the legislations and standards, this will help. But at the local level, because they're so different, there's no universality. And on top of that, each person's needs are different.
Yes. Yeah. When you're thinking about those emergency measures standards, what kind of legislation that's currently there or new bills that are coming up that you would love to see changed?
Well, the current emergency measure standards, I'm just going to read the list of what the federal standards emergency measures is going to be looking at.
Mm-hmm.
There's emergency planning, inclusivity, so that includes PWDs participating in all aspects of the planning measures. Guidance, which is the emergency preparedness guide that I described earlier. Training, self-explanatory. Communication methods, that's, for example, the public notification alerts. Shelters, that's a whole nother session that needs work. Services, so that's like individuals that utilize assistive technology or devices, and service dogs, those kind of things. Medical assistance, that's like medical supplies. And medical supplies is one of the hot topics that had been discussed in the committee that I sit on with Prepared BC and EMCR, because there's so many contributing issues. For example, when you build your kit, you need extra medication, but some medications expire quickly more than others, and some doctors won't give you extra refills, etc. So there's a lot of issues surrounding that we're trying to overcome. And transportation, that's a big one. That's another big one. Because a lot of people with disabilities can't ride.
Yeah.
Hello.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So that's the other thing. And the last one is evacuation, because it depends on the evacuation route. For example, after earthquakes, for example, the key thing is, especially for blind and deafblind, they don't know if there's going to be hazards once they step out the door. How are they going to get to safely? That kind of thing.
Yeah.
Now, I wish standards were law. And the problem with standards is not enforceable. So that's kind of the issue that I have with the legislation. A lot of emergency management legislation don't include any of that. And so it's just put on the side. It needs to be including everybody.
Yeah. So, and it's fair. It needs to be legislated. Things that have been legislated in my time walking on this planet has been accessibility parking spots and ensuring that there are ramps to get into buildings and there's elevators and ways to move between floors. Lots of different things. The fire alarm systems are changing all around us.
Yes.
So we're going from an old bell system to the blinking and loud screech of an alarm. So there's been legislated changes, and they happen, and they actually help everyone. When I look at accessibility parking spots, the people I see using them most are people that are elderly, and we don't often think about that until we're that age, right? So, but it's a reality that kind of creeps our way as we age, and we need to realize that we might not be a person with a disability today, but we might be someday. So, and we would certainly benefit from the things that are out there and legislated in place for us. So, some great.
Yeah, and on that point, through the World Health Organization and the UNDRR, they made a point that 1 of 6 people worldwide will have a disability in their lifetime. So people don't think that, it'll never happen to me. They say, well, you never know. It will happen tomorrow.
We had a big surge in new listeners twice in recent weeks, and a big welcome to anyone new to the podcast. That's you. So thank you. This episode and many others are available in a captioned video version. And this one has an ASL interpreter. I am always trying to make communications more inclusive for everyone, beyond those with disabilities. A bit more about that at the end. I almost have the summer covered with episodes, and I hope you'll hear them throughout August and September. Much of that depends on disaster responses, especially wildfires, but so far so good. If I'm able to keep producing, you'll also see video episodes to match. If you want to see our video episodes, you can find them at communicationspodcast.com on the episodes page or on the video podcast playlist at Butterfly Effect Communications YouTube channel. You can actually subscribe there and you'll get a notification anytime there's a new video episode. Thank you for our best single day of downloads. Mosi Chao, which is thank you in Carrier, which is an Indigenous peoples based up in northern British Columbia. Mosi Chao to our audience in Spain. Congratulations on that big win. And us Canadians, we really love that stage presence of your team. Thanks to viewers and listeners in these communities: Sydney, Australia; Sora, Italy; Surrey, British Columbia; Antioch, California; and Smiths Falls, Ontario. 6 continents, 60 countries, 700 communities. You're all out there. Thank you so much for joining, even if it's just for one episode, to learn a bit and share a bit of the journey with my guests. Mosi Chao. So next up are 3 questions that I pose to every guest, so let's roll. What is one book, documentary, or resource that you recommend for those learning about crisis, emergency management, or maybe even something like accessibility?
And, I reiterated a lot of the other ones in our whole hour. The most important thing as far as accessibility, one of the things that people should look at is Accessible Canada Act, and look at their provincial acts as well, because some of them will be aligned with the federal standards and also the accessibility standards of Canada. And for those that want to follow me on Facebook or LinkedIn, I will be letting folks know when the federal standards emergency measures will be available to recruit people that want to be participate in the committee. Stay tuned on that. And then also the public consultation for the actual standards once the draft standards available. And also the United Nations of Disaster Risk Reduction. One of the things that they have implemented is a UN disability inclusion strategy. So I'm on their email list, follow up with the different policy guides that they have implemented. Not all organizations or states have implemented policies within their country. So I would actually recommend folks check out the United Nations Disaster Risk Reduction UN Disability Inclusion Strategy, just to see what they are and all the statistics in there too.
Excellent. And what advice could you offer information officers or communicators that are managing crisis or emergencies that would help them to perform their job more effectively?
One of the key things that communications coordinators and those that work in the communication fields, they need to implement accessibility in their social media channels. So if you ever have a chance to look at the Canadian Risk and Hazard Network social media pages on LinkedIn or Facebook, we implement image description. So if you're going to add a map to your thing, include image description so it includes everybody. So there are a lot of different ways to implement that. And also plain language. That's very, very critical to implement. Okay? So those are the key points that I want to reiterate, the accessibility side of things with social media.
Yeah, and just so people out there know, if you hire a public relations professional, we are trained in plain language as our journalists. So they're actually trained to write in plain language and to write at different grade levels. So we write at grade 9 and grade 6 levels. We can go up to grade 12s and so on. So yeah, my last question is, how do you maintain your mental well-being during the most intense moments of response?
Well, when I was during my time that I used to be a Red Cross staff, I would be the one that would be covering and stay behind the covering while all the staff were out on response. And And I'm very good at de-stressing. I have very good work-life balance. I make sure that my weekends is not work-related, for example.
Mhm.
I have to have a social life. That's important. And doing other things like reading and walking. And it's really important to de-stress and taking care of yourself. The perk of being deaf, I can sleep really heavily. I can get away with between 4 to 8 hours of sleep, no problem. But sleep is important, trying to eat well and exercise, right? So all of those components will help you really well. And if you feel like you're going to get stressed, the best way to handle it is walk away.
My roots are in Special Olympics. It is there that I went from an introverted kid to an extroverted adult. They taught me through small lessons how important it is to keep everyone involved in life's moments. They also showed me that disabilities are simply allowing those other abilities that we have to step into the spotlight and shine. Jen has set an example in how to communicate inclusive of everyone. I encourage you to see some of the work she is doing at CRHNet on their social channels, and please contact her. Since meeting her last year, she has pushed me to add more to this podcast to make it accessible, and I stretched that into my work as a public relations professional and information officer. It is a gift to have a colleague like her around to shift perspectives. Even when she's not realizing it, she makes you better. If you can't have this Jen, I hope you'll find one in your community that can inspire a better way, the way Jen does. Thank you to Jen for being a guest and providing such useful information. If you're lucky enough to meet her, you'll see her excitement anytime she gets to join a conversation about emergency management and improving accessibility. Here's a clip of her presenting at this year's CRHNet Symposium. To contact Jen McEachen, you can find her information at communicationspodcast.com, where there are images, transcripts, and in the weeks after, a matching video version with some extras. And of course, there's a picture of Parmesan there. This time, I'm also excited that the video includes Tanya, an ASL or American Sign Language interpreter. Thanks, Tanya, for offering ASL to our audience. This is the Wildfires, Floods, and Chaos Communications podcast. Thank you for joining me. You stayed this long. If you like it, share it with someone. Goodbye. Hear me later.